The auction, a life for sale. The auction house was cold and dimly lit, filled with the buzz of low conversations and the clink of coins. Rows of aliens, some with glowing skin, others with strange, inhuman features, stood nervously on display. They were being sold like objects, traded to the highest bidder. Among them was a young alien princess, her golden eyes filled with sadness as she stood alone. She had been abandoned by her own people. No one wanted her anymore. The moment she was born, her future was decided by those in power. Her family saw her as weak and useless, a burden that they couldn't bear. So, they made the choice to sell her. She had been put up for auction and now she waited for someone to claim her. The princess wore a simple, faded robe. Her hair, once long and shining, was now tangled and messy. Her skin, usually radiant, seemed dull under the harsh lights of the auction room. She barely looked up as the other aliens around her were sold one by one. She had learned to keep her head down and her emotions hidden. Her heart was heavy, her spirit broken. This was her life now. The auctioneer, a tall, cold figure, called out the names of the next alien to be sold. Next up, a strong and beautiful alien from the Zara system, he announced with enthusiasm. The crowd cheered and the bidding started. The princess felt a pang of jealousy. She had seen many of these beings sold to wealthy buyers, their new owners treating them like prized possessions, but no one had ever looked at her that way. She was just another unwanted soul, waiting for a price to be set on her life. Her heart sank when the auctioneer's voice rang out again. And now, we have a special item, a rare alien from the Ivra planet. She is young, but she is special in her own way. The auctioneer gestured to her, and the crowd fell silent. The princess stood still, unable to move. She had been sold to the highest bidder before, but it had always felt like a cruel joke. She didn't want to go anywhere. She didn't want to be claimed by anyone. As the auctioneer began the bidding, she tried to block out the voices. She focused on the floor, trying to ignore the way the crowd stared at her. She had seen enough of this to know it would end the same way. No one would bid for her. She was too broken, too weak. But then, something strange happened. In the back of the room, she noticed a figure standing alone. It was a man. His clothes were simple, his posture confident, and his eyes were fixed on her. He wasn't like the others in the room. His gaze wasn't cold, nor was it filled with judgment. There was something in his eyes, something that made her feel seen. The princess couldn't understand why, but in that moment, it was as if he was the only one in the room who cared. The bidding continued, but the princess didn't hear the numbers. She was lost in the eyes of the man in the back. She couldn't tear her gaze away from him. Why was he looking at her like that? Was he truly interested? She had seen others before, rich, powerful beings who looked at her only as a way to increase their wealth or status. They didn't care about her, just what she could do for them. But this man, he wasn't like the rest. The auctioneer's voice broke her thoughts. And now the final bid. Do I have anyone willing to take her? The princess's heart raced. It was happening again. The moment she had been dreading. No one would want her. She would be sold to someone who wouldn't care. But then, just as the auctioneer was about to drop the hammer, she saw the man move. He raised his hand, slowly, deliberately, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. The room fell silent again. The other bidders stared at him, confused. A human. What was a human doing in an alien auction house? The princess's heart skipped a beat. She had never seen a human before. They were rare in this part of the galaxy, often treated like second-class citizens. But this one, this man, was different. The auctioneer looked at him with surprise. You want her? He asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. She's not like the others. She's different. The man didn't say anything. He just nodded. A quiet determination filled his eyes. The princess could see that he wasn't just bidding for her like everyone else. He was choosing her, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she had a choice too. The auctioneer hesitated, then called out, "Sold." To the human at the back, the princess's world seemed to stop. She had been sold, but not to just anyone. A human had chosen her. She didn't know why, but for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. What would happen next? Would this man truly change her life forever? As the crowd began to shuffle out, the princess took a deep breath. She wasn't sure what was coming, but she had a feeling this was the start of something new. Something different. Something better. The human's decision. The princess stood still as the crowd began to scatter, murmurs filling the air. Her heart raced, but she didn't move. The gavel had already fallen, and her fate had been decided, but it wasn't like the others. No one had claimed her yet. The human who had raised his hand now made his way toward her, his calm, steady steps echoing in the silence that filled the room. She had expected to feel a deep sense of dread as she was approached by her new owner. After all, she had spent her life in servitude, given no choice but to follow the whims of those who bought her. But as this human came closer, the weight in her chest didn't grow heavier. It eased ever so slightly, as though a breath she didn't realize she was holding was finally let out. The human wasn't like the others. His clothes were simple, a worn jacket, plain trousers, but there was something about the way he carried himself that set him apart. His eyes were kind but firm, as if he had made a decision long before walking into this place. The princess had never seen a human before, but she could tell that there was something different about him. He wasn't looking at her as if she were an object, nor was he glancing over her like the others, trying to decide what he could gain from her. Instead, he met her eyes with an unwavering gaze, and for the first time in her life, the princess felt truly seen. The other aliens who had been sold earlier didn't have the luxury of such attention. They were taken with a cold, calculated indifference. But this human, he made her feel important. He stopped in front of her, his expression softening as he looked at her. There was no smug smile, no attempt to make her feel inferior. It was as though he truly wanted to know her, not just own her. "You're coming with me," he said quietly, his voice low and filled with an odd sense of calm certainty. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure why she had expected something different. She had been sold countless times before, but this felt different. His words weren't harsh, nor were they full of power. They were simple, honest. He was not commanding her, but instead offering something she hadn't had before, a choice. The auctioneer's voice cut through the moment, his tone now full of surprise. "Are you sure? You know, she's not like the others. She's fragile. She doesn't have the strength of some of these others." The human glanced briefly at the auctioneer, his face remaining unchanged. "I'm sure." The princess felt a strange warmth spread through her, though she couldn't understand it. Why had he chosen her? What could he possibly see in her? She was broken, abandoned, unwanted. No one else had looked at her this way. His gaze didn't make her feel less than, but somehow more. Without another word, he extended his hand to her. There was no rush, no command, just a simple offering of help. Slowly she reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed against his. His touch was warm, reassuring, not at all what she had expected. "Come on," he said gently, pulling her towards him, but not forcefully. His grip was steady and sure, guiding her with patience she didn't know she needed. The princess took a hesitant step forward, then another, her mind racing. She had never been treated like this. It was almost like he wasn't just saving her from the auction, but offering her something more. But what was it? What did he want from her? The room was still buzzing with conversations, but it felt as though all the noise had faded away, leaving only the two of them in a quiet bubble. The human led her to the exit, the crowd parting around them as they made their way to the door. As they stepped outside into the cold night air, the princess could feel a strange sense of freedom she hadn't known in years. For the first time, in her life, she wasn't walking towards another cage. She wasn't being sold again. She was free, at least for this moment. She could feel the weight lifting from her shoulders. But was it real? Could this truly be the end of her suffering? Or was she just stepping into a new, unknown kind of captivity? The human didn't say a word, but she could feel the tension in his body. He was serious. He wasn't just another buyer, another master who would treat her like property. There was something different in the way he held himself. Something that told her that whatever was coming next, it would be more than just another cruel chapter of her life. And with that, the princess stepped into the unknown, her heart torn between fear and the faintest glimmer of hope. She wasn't sure what her future held, but for the first time it felt like she had a say in it. A new beginning. The human led her down the streets of the bustling alien city, his grip steady on her hand. The princess walked beside him, unsure of where they were going, or what would happen next. The city was alive with sounds, alien languages, the hum of futuristic machines, and the buzz of markets selling exotic goods. But despite the chaos around her, she felt strangely calm in this human's presence. The princess had never known peace. Her life had been one of constant chaos, always being moved from one place to another, one master to the next. She had been told what to do, when to speak, when to be silent. She was a commodity, a possession, nothing more. But now, walking beside this human, she felt something she had never felt before, a sense of freedom. He didn't pull her along like others had done in the past. He didn't shout at her or treat her as if she were beneath him. Instead, he simply walked, his presence so calm that she couldn't help but mirror his steps. Her mind raced with questions, but she held them back, unsure how to ask. She didn't want to sound weak or desperate, even though she felt both. They arrived at a small building, tucked away on a quiet side street. It was modest, nothing grand or impressive like the mansion she had been sold to in the past. But as the human opened the door, she felt an unexpected sense of warmth wash over her. The air inside smelled of wood, something earthy and real like a home rather than a prison. "This is where we'll stay for now," the human said, his voice gentle but firm. The princess stepped inside, her eyes scanning the space. The walls were lined with simple furniture, shelves filled with books and tools, a few plants sitting in the corner. There was a small fire burning in the hearth, casting a soft glow across the room. It wasn't grand, but it felt comfortable, safe, even. The human closed the door behind them and turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said, his eyes softening. "But you're not just here to serve. You're here because I want you to be here. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do." The princess stood in silence for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. No one had ever spoken to her this way. No one had ever given her a choice. In every other place she had lived, she had been told what was expected of her, and she had followed without question. But here, now, for the first time, there was a sense of agency in her. She could do what she wanted, she could choose. She glanced at the human, unsure what to say. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you choose me?" The human looked at her for a long moment, his expression serious. "I saw something in you," he said simply. "I don't know what it is yet, but I know you're not like the others. You're not just something to be used. You have your own story, your own life to live, and I'm not going to take that from you." His words left her speechless. She had never heard anything like it. She had been taught that her life wasn't her own, that she existed only to serve others, to fulfill their desires. But here, in this simple home with this stranger, she was being treated as a person. Not as property, not as a tool, but as someone with value. The human turned away to stoke the fire, giving her space to think. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, his voice casual now. "I'll go out and get us something to eat." The princess stood there for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She was alone in this room, but for the first time she didn't feel completely lost. It was strange, unfamiliar, but in a way that didn't fill her with dread. She could feel the walls she had built around herself slowly begin to crumble, and it was both terrifying and liberating. As the human left the room, the princess moved over to one of the bookshelves. She ran her fingers over the spines of the books, noticing the titles in languages she didn't recognize. She had never learned to read in the way the humans did, but the idea of learning, of choosing what she wanted to know, felt like a dream she had never dared to dream. She sat down on a soft chair near the fire, her mind racing. What was happening? Could this human really change her life? Could she change her life? The fear still lingered in the back of her mind, the nagging feeling that nothing good could last. But as she sat there, wrapped in the warmth of the fire, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The princess wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in her life, it felt like it was in her hands. Life with the human, the days that followed, were unlike anything the princess had ever known. She had spent most of her life in the harsh, cold spaces of auction houses and alien markets, always moving from one place to another. But now, in the small, quiet home with the human, she felt something shift inside her, a warmth, a flicker of something she hadn't known existed. It wasn't just safety, it was peace. At first, she was hesitant to explore the house. She stayed in the room near the fire, unsure of what to do with herself. The human had gone out each day to find food, and when he returned, he always brought something new: fresh fruits, strange meats, or sometimes a small gift wrapped in simple cloth. He never asked for anything in return, never expected her to cook or clean. He didn't treat her like a servant, and that was the most confusing thing of all. She wasn't used to being treated with kindness. It was always a transaction before. Serve, me and I will feed you, clothe you. But here there was no exchange. There was no price. The human's actions spoke of a trust she couldn't yet understand. One morning, as the sun began to rise, the princess sat by the window, watching the sky change colors. The human had left early for supplies, but she felt a strange pull to step outside. The air was crisp and the streets were quiet, the world still sleeping. She slowly opened the door, her feet hesitating as they touched the ground. The earth was solid beneath her, the grass cool against her bare skin. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she felt this freedom. She wandered around the yard, exploring the small garden the human had started. There were plants she didn't recognize, their colors vibrant under the early morning light. She knelt down to touch the leaves, running her fingers over the smooth surface. In that moment, she realized something. She hadn't been allowed to touch anything in years. Everything had been out of her reach, always behind a wall, behind a command. But now, for the first time, she was allowed to touch, to feel the earth beneath her hands. She wasn't sure why, but this simple act of being allowed to exist freely in a space felt like a gift. When the human returned, he found her outside, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I see you're starting to explore," he said, his tone light. The princess stood up, brushing dirt from her hands. "I didn't know I could," she admitted, her voice quiet. It felt strange to say the words. "I never had the chance before." The human nodded, as though he understood. "Here, you're free to do what you want. You're not a prisoner anymore." Her heart beat a little faster at those words. It was the first time anyone had said it like that, without an agenda, without wanting something in return. She was free, and the idea of it was both exhilarating and terrifying. As days turned into weeks, the princess began to find more of herself in the small, everyday moments. She helped him with the chores around the house, though she did so because she wanted to, not because she had to. She even started to learn from the books on the shelf, something she had never done before. She had always been taught that learning was something for those who had power, for those who had time to waste. But here, with the human, it felt different. It wasn't about power. It was about growth. One evening, after a simple meal they had prepared together, the human turned to her. "You're doing well," he said with a smile. "You're more than I expected." The princess looked at him confused. "What do you mean?" "I thought you'd be more difficult to trust, he admitted, his gaze soft. But you're changing in ways I didn't expect. She stared at him, trying to process his words. It was true. She was changing. She wasn't the same alien who had stood at the auction block, broken and hopeless. She was becoming someone else, someone she didn't even recognize. But who was she becoming? What would she do with this new life, this new freedom? She didn't have the answers yet. But one thing was clear. The human had given her something, priceless. Not just her freedom, but the chance to find herself again. And as the days passed, the princess realized that she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. The princess's past catches up. It was a quiet afternoon when the knock came at the door. The human had just returned from the market, his arms full of fruits and bread, his face light with a rare smile. The princess had been sitting by the window, reading one of the books she had grown fond of, when the sound of the knock sent a ripple of tension through the air. Her heart skipped. She had learned quickly that in this new life nothing was ever truly free. The walls she had built around herself, the freedom she had begun to embrace, felt fragile now. Could it really last? Could she ever truly escape her past? The human stepped forward, glancing at her with a reassuring nod. Stay inside. I'll take care of it. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of unease in his eyes. The princess didn't argue. She knew the drill. Whenever someone from her past came looking for her, things got complicated. They always did. They always found her. She stayed by the window, watching the human open the door. The voices outside were muffled, and she couldn't make out the words. She wanted to look away, to turn back to her book, but she couldn't. A sense of dread began to settle deep in her stomach like a storm rolling in on the horizon. After a few moments, the door closed with a soft click. The human stepped back inside, but his face was different now, his jaw tense, his eyes hard. They're here, he said, his voice low. They want you back. The princess's heart thudded in her chest, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. The words were a blow, sharper than anything she had ever felt before. She had known this day would come. She had known that her past would never truly let her go. The people who had sold her, who had discarded her like trash, were not going to let her live in peace. Not now, not ever. Who are they? She asked, her voice barely a whisper, as though speaking too loudly would make it all real. They're from the HFY system, he replied. They're the ones who sold you at the auction. I don't know why they're here, but I don't trust them. A coldness swept over her as she remembered the faces of those who had used her, treated her as a possession, a tool for their own gain. She had been a slave to them, forced to do their bidding, nothing more than a tool to be disposed of when they no longer had use for her. And now they were back to take her away. I don't want to go back, she said, her voice trembling. I can't go back to them. The human stepped forward, his gaze steady but firm. You won't have to, I'm not letting them take you. But even as he spoke, the princess could see the doubt in his eyes. He was brave, but he was only one man. The people who had come for her weren't just any ordinary buyers. They were powerful, connected. The HFY system was known for its ruthless leaders and its grip on the galaxy's most precious resources. They wouldn't just walk away. They won't stop until they have you, she whispered, her mind racing. They've never let me go before. The human's expression softened, but his determination never wavered. They don't know me, and they don't know what I'm willing to do to protect you. For the first time, the princess saw something in his eyes that matched the resolve in her own heart, a fire, a promise, that nothing would tear them apart. She wasn't just a slave anymore. She wasn't an object to be traded. She was something more, something worth fighting for. But the reality of their situation settled in quickly. The princess had never faced an enemy like the ones who were coming. For her, the HFY system didn't take no for an answer. They would fight until they had what they wanted. The princess felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. The life she had begun to build, the fragile peace she had found, was about to be shattered. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. The human wouldn't let her go without a fight. and for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if she wanted to run or stand beside him. The knock at the door hadn't just been a simple visitor. It was a warning. The past was coming for her, and this time she wasn't going to face it alone. The fight for freedom. The days following the knock at the door were tense, filled with an uncertainty that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The human, ever steady, had taken to preparing in ways the princess didn't fully understand. He gathered supplies, sharpened tools, and made quiet plans that he didn't share with her. It was clear now. They weren't just waiting for the inevitable. They were preparing for a fight. The princess spent her days pacing, trying to find something to do to pass the time, but her mind was consumed by the thought of those who would come for her. She had never been a fighter. She had never been given the chance. She had always been someone else's pawn, someone else's tool. But now, she wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for something more, for her freedom, for the chance to finally live her life on her own terms. One night, as the human stoked the fire in the hearth, she finally spoke what had been on her mind for days. What if we can't win? What if they come with more than we can handle? The human paused, his hand hovering over the flames. He didn't look at her immediately, but his voice, when he finally spoke, was steady. We won't let them win. I won't let them take you back. You've already fought your way this far. You're not alone in this. The princess looked at him, his words offering a strange comfort. She had never been good at trusting others, at relying on anyone but herself. But there was something in his gaze that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, he was right. Maybe together they could face whatever was coming. But despite his words, fear lingered in her chest. She had seen what the Ivra system was capable of. They didn't play fair, they didn't care about lives, only power. The human may have been prepared to stand by her, but she was not so sure that would be enough. The following day, as dawn broke over the horizon, the sound of engines in the distance made her blood run cold. The hum was unmistakable, powerful, heavy, and full of danger. The princess felt the familiar tightening in her chest. They were coming. The human looked at her, his expression unreadable, but there was a fire in his eyes. He had already made up his mind. He was ready to fight. Stay inside, he instructed her quietly, his voice firm yet full of determination. I'll deal with them. She shook her head. No, I can't hide while you fight alone. This is my fight too. He opened his mouth to protest, but she held up her hand. I'm not afraid anymore. I won't run, not this time. The human didn't say anything more. He simply nodded, as though her words had settled something deep within him. He had no intention of leaving her behind, and neither did she. Together they moved swiftly through the small house, gathering what they could. The princess could feel the weight of the coming battle pressing down on them both, but there was something else, something different about this moment. It wasn't just about escaping. It wasn't about running away. It was about standing tall, even when the odds seemed impossible. As they made their way to the yard, the princess's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't a fighter. She had no skills in combat, no knowledge of how to defend herself. But she had something far stronger now, a purpose, a reason to fight. The human didn't see her as weak. He saw her as an equal. And for the first time, she believed him. They reached the edge of the yard just as the shadow of the approaching ships loomed overhead. The human held a weapon, something simple but effective, crafted from materials he had scavenged. It wasn't much, but it was enough for what they needed. He turned to her one last time, his eyes meeting hers. This is it, he said, his voice filled with conviction. We fight, and we win. Together. The princess nodded, her body steady now, her mind clear. She wasn't afraid of what was coming. She had already been broken once, but she would not let it happen again. This time she had a choice. She had someone who believed in her. And that was all the strength she needed. The first blast from the enemy ship struck the ground. With a deafening boom, and the fight began. The princess didn't hesitate. She moved beside the human, her eyes focused, her body moving on instinct. The world had shifted. No longer was she the fragile princess at an auction, waiting to be claimed by a buyer. No longer was she the broken soul trapped by the chains of her past. She was something more now. She was a fighter, and this was her battle. A life transformed. The battle had been fierce, the kind of fight neither of them could have fully prepared for. The ground had been torn apart by explosions, the air thick with the smoke of laser fire. The princess and the human had fought side by side, their movements almost in sync, a dance of survival as the HFY forces came at them from all sides. But through it all, the human had never once faltered. His presence was a constant reassurance, a pillar of strength that kept her grounded, even when everything else felt like it was crumbling. The enemy had come in waves, but with each one, they were pushed back. The human fought with a quiet intensity, and the princess, despite her lack of experience, found herself rising to the occasion. She had never felt such strength within her, and yet here, in this fight for freedom, it surged like a fire she hadn't known was there. She wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was fighting for something greater, her future, her right to live as she chose. By the time the dust began to settle, the air was eerily quiet. The HFY forces had been repelled, their retreat marked by the rising smoke of their damaged ships. The princess stood breathless and covered in dust, her body aching from the effort. But she couldn't remember the last time she had felt so alive. The human stood beside her, his expression focused but not without the signs of exhaustion. He was wiping blood from his brow, but his eyes, those eyes, were filled with a quiet pride. "We did it," he said, his voice low, almost in disbelief. The princess looked at him, her heart swelling. "You didn't give up on me. Even when I couldn't fight, you believed I could. I've never had that before." He smiled, a soft, genuine expression that made the princess's chest tighten. "You're stronger than you know. And you've always had the strength to fight for yourself. I just helped you see it." Her gaze softened, and for the first time she realized just how much had changed in such a short time. The girl who had been left abandoned, broken, and forgotten at an auction was no longer the same. She had found something inside herself, something she had never been allowed to find before. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, truly living. And she owed that to this human who had seen her as more than just a broken alien. The human reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch steady and grounding. "This is just the beginning," he said. "You're not alone in this world anymore. We'll build something together, something strong." For the first time, the princess didn't feel fear at those words. She didn't feel the overwhelming sense of dread that had always been a part of her life. No. This time, when she looked toward the future, she felt a spark of hope. It wasn't just a hope for survival. It was a hope for something bigger, something worth fighting for. The princess took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time she wasn't afraid to face it. The past, with all its pain and betrayal, no longer defined her. It was behind her now. What mattered was what lay ahead, and she was no longer alone in that journey. She turned to the human, her eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper, something stronger. "I'm not who I was when you found me. I've changed. I've grown." He smiled softly, a hint of pride in his eyes. "We both have." Together they stood in the aftermath of the battle. The destruction around them was a symbol of everything they had fought to overcome, everything they had fought to protect. The princess knew that whatever challenges came next, she wouldn't face them alone. Not anymore. With a final glance at the horizon, she knew that this was just the beginning. The world was full of uncertainties, but now she was ready to face them, with the human by her side. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a pawn. She felt like a person, and that, she realized, was worth fighting for.